All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to our lesson on stored procedures and stored functions. So this is going to be part 3 of our 4-part series, and in this particular, I suppose you can call it an episode, we're going to be looking at stored procedures with the if statements. Okay, so we're looking at control type flow structures, and we're going to be looking at in parameters and out parameters. Okay, we're going to look at how to integrate that into our stored procedures. Okay, so let's flip back to the presentation and move on to looking at a stored procedure now with some sort of conditional logic. Okay, in this case, I'm not going to use a loop, but you absolutely can use loops. For this one, I'm just going to use an if statement. So, same thing here. We change the delimiter, create procedure. We're going to say get transactions by type, and we're going to pass in. Okay, this is another in parameter. We're going to pass in a type for the transaction type. All right. Then, oops, I just skipped forward, my apologies. So then we're going to begin our procedure, and here I have an if statement. So this is the structure for an if statement inside of MySQL. Typically, I'm used to using round brackets here, round, what do they call parenthesis, between for my if statements, but apparently you don't need to use them, which for me, I couldn't figure out. I spent so long trying to figure out why it wasn't compiling properly, and it was because I had the round parentheses in there. My apologies for that. So I guess I don't really need to apologize to you about that. I just wasted a bunch of time for myself. I'm passing on that knowledge to you now. So really, you should be thanking me, right? Right. So let's go on. So you say if the type, which is the type being passed in, if type equals C, then I just say select star from transactions where transaction type equals C. Else if type equals D, then select star from transactions where transaction type equals D. I'm not following my case very well here. Here's an uppercase D, here's a lowercase d, but I guess in this case it doesn't really matter. Otherwise, so this is where the else really where the conditional logic comes into play. Otherwise, if they don't pass in a C or a D, if they pass in something else, then I'm just going to default it to saying get all the transactions. All right, that's just how that's how this particular procedure is going to function. Who knows why it would function like that, but let's just say that's a requirement of our system. But I just wanted to show you that you can use this conditional logic, and there could be, some interesting ways you can use conditional logic inside of a procedure. So then there you go. So let's recreate this as well and test it out and see how it works inside of our SQL Server. So let me flip over. Actually, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to grab the actual code itself. Let me go to my slide notes, and let me actually grab that procedure, just because I don't want to have to type in the entire procedure, because that would be a bit of a pain. And let me grab all the code and say copy. Now what I can do is I can just paste in that code here, like so, and then make sure I change the name of my drop procedure if exists to match the name of the one we just typed in. And then I'm going to call it with some appropriate stuff. So again, we can go over this. I'm just dropping it if it exists already, changing the delimiter. I'm going to create the procedure with the in, parameter, in parameter. The in parameter is called type. The data type of the in parameter is just a character, just char. And then type is used inside of the procedure with the if statement. So if type equals C, then we return only the transactions of type C. If the type is D, then just the transaction types of D. Otherwise, we return everything. So let's test this out. Let's call it, because again, call is the keyword we use when we are executing our procedures. And I'm passing in C. So I just want to see the credit types for our transactions. So let me run this. And sure enough, as you can see in the result set, all of them are of transaction type C. Now, if I change this, let me actually stop. I'm going to hit the stop button on my query there, because it's going to take forever to run it through all the different, of the 5 million rows I have in here. Let me change it to type D, and let me run this one. And sure enough, all you see is type D in the returned transaction types. Take my word for it. I don't want to scroll through them all, but they are all of type D. And I'm going to stop it again so it doesn't run forever. And then let me change the transaction type to something like R. Okay, because we don't have any transaction type R's, but this is going to hit the else part of our logic, where it should just return all of the transactions. So let me run this. And sure enough, you see it returns both transaction types of C as well as D. All right, so there you go. That's how we create a stored procedure with an in parameter as well as some conditional logic. Very cool stuff, very helpful stuff for creating nice, long, big, helpful, useful procedures. All right, I stopped the command again because it'll take forever to run. So let's flip back to our, what you call it here, presentation, and go to the next example. So now I want to show you how to create a stored procedure with both in and out parameters. So let's just get to it. So this one is called get first transaction on date. So here what it should do is I want to get the first transaction that occurred on a particular date that we will pass in. All right. So whatever, I don't know why you'd want to do this. Maybe there's, let's say we're running some sort of a competition or a contest to say the first one to use their, credit card or something like that, or debit account, every day of the week will get some sort of a prize. Who knows? Well, who knows why you'd want to do this? But in any case, let's say we've received this as our command. This is what we need to do. This is what we need to implement. So let's do it. So how do we do this? How do we make it return essentially the first transaction of the day using in and out parameters? So here, you've seen this already, but I'll go over it again. You define an in parameter as the transaction date. This will represent the date that we're checking, and this is just going to be a date type. And then we have an out parameter. So this is something that we haven't seen yet. The out parameter, I'm returning the actual transaction ID of the first transaction that occurs on the given date. Okay, and the out parameter transaction ID is going to be an int data type. So it's just a standard int. So begin and end, you're familiar with begin, end, with these delimiters and all that stuff. You should understand that by now. Let's get into the actual contents of the procedure. So the first thing that you're going to notice that's different here is the syntax that we use with an out parameter. So here we use the into keyword. So we say select transaction ID into TXN ID. Okay, so TXN ID is the out parameter that we've passed into our parameters that we are using inside of the procedure. But what we're saying is we're selecting specifically the transaction ID. So whatever value is returned for the transaction ID, it will be stored into the transaction ID out parameter. All right? And then we'll say select that from transactions where the transaction date is between the transaction date that we actually specified. So this will just say, whatever the date is from the beginning of the day to the end of the day, check all the transactions. And then what I'm doing is I'm ordering it by the transaction date. So I'm saying order it in ascending order, because if you don't specify if it's ascending or descending, it defaults to ascending order. If you don't remember that from our tutorial on ordering, that's how it works. So it will order by transaction date in ascending format. So it will put the earliest transaction at the top, and then I'm saying limit 1. So I'm saying just limit the results to just give me the first entry, the first result from that query. All right, so you see why I did that? So I'm limiting it to one result, and then what's happening is I'm storing that one result into the transaction ID out variable, or out parameter. All right, now there's more to this because we actually want to make use of this out parameter, and I haven't shown you in this example how to do that. At least I don't think I do it in the next one. No, I don't. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually recreate this and show you how to do it. So I'm going to go back to my SQL, and same thing, I'm going to go back also to the actual slides and grab the code so I don't have to waste time typing all of this out. Like so, paste it in, make sure I change all of my appropriate things around it. All right. So I don't want to go over all the contents of this again because I've just explained it and it would sort of be redundant to say it again. I'm sure you guys would not like that. If you need an explanation of what it is that this does, just rewind this video. Saves me a little bit of talking. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to call this procedure, but I need to call it with the appropriate parameters. So what do I need to pass in? I need to pass in the transaction date. So let's just say, let's pass in today's date. I want to see all of the transactions that occurred on today's date, like so. And I need to specify an out parameter. So what does an out parameter look like? Well, believe it or not, it needs to be started with an @ symbol. So the @ symbol specifies a variable inside of MySQL. And then we need to give it a name for the variable. So this is going to be, let's just call it TXN ID to sort of be consistent with the name of our out parameter that we've defined in our procedure. It doesn't have to be @transaction or TXN ID. It could be whatever else you like it to be. It could actually be spelled out as transaction ID if you like. It doesn't matter as long as you stay consistent with the name of it. But just to stay consistent with the actual procedure name so you don't get confused, I will name it TXN ID. Okay? Then what happens is I can run this and it will actually, well, it'll do something, but you won't see the benefit of it just yet. So I'm going to hit the F5 key to run this statement. Okay? And it's still going. Oops, did I run the actual... Let me, it looks like it worked, but I did not run this procedure. I need to run this and make sure that it actually exists like I think it exists. So let me run this so it drops the procedure and creates it again. Okay, there. Just to be sure that it's doing what I need it to do. Then I'm going to run this again. Okay? And I'm going to let it do its thing. It's going to do, all the logic inside of it. It took about 4 seconds to run the logic. And you see it says 1 row is affected. But nothing else happens. So you might think that this was a bit of a failure. You don't see anything come out of this procedure that you just called. But really the magic that happened is it has now stored the appropriate information inside of our out parameter, which we've declared as a variable here. So again, this variable is in place in the second position of the parameter list. Okay, this is in the second slot. As you can see, we have the first slot here, and then the second slot here. Okay, it's after the comma, so it's the second position. The second position holds an out parameter. So because this is in the second position as well, and we are calling this particular procedure, that means that this is being stored as an out parameter, and it's being populated with the result of the procedure that we have outlined. So what that means is this now holds the actual real transaction ID of the first transaction that occurred on October 12, 2014. But how the heck do we see it? Well, we just say select at TXN ID. When we run this select statement, that will tell us exactly what's inside of this variable. So let me run that. And sure enough, there it is. At TXN ID holds this number. So let's actually verify that so that I know I'm not full of it. Now I'm going to say select star from transactions where transaction ID equals, and that's the transaction ID that's stored inside of the at TXN ID variable. And I'm going to run that. And sure enough, you see that it's a transaction exactly at midnight on October 12th, 2014. So this is most likely the very first, or rather it should be exactly the very first transaction that was run on October 12th at 2014. So it happened at the very first second, I guess, within the very first second of the day. So that's the first transaction. So you see that worked. Or if you want to, you could even substitute, instead of putting the actual transaction ID, you can paste in the name of the variable and run this again. And as you can see, it just returns the exact same thing, because this actually stores the transaction ID. So now if I wanted to, I can change this date to be the 13th of October, and I can actually, let me delete this select TXN ID because it's going to be redundant. And I can run these two things together, and it will show me as a result the first transaction that occurred on October 13th. Okay, so let me run that and see what happens. Remember, it takes about 4 seconds to run, so it's now running. And it is done running. So there you go. So now we have hit the first transaction on October 13th. Okay, so now this becomes quite dynamic. You can type in whatever you want. Let's say you want the first transaction on December 31st, and you run it, and we wait, and then you will get it. There you go. So there's the first transaction on December 31st. So it's very cool. It's very flexible. That's the beauty of having out parameters. And also, if you wanted to, you can have more than one out parameter if you like. Okay, so you don't have to have just one out parameter here. You can keep on going and have several out parameters and use them all inside of your call, and then use them all outside of it as well, because that's the beauty of using out parameters. All right, very, very cool stuff. Very, very powerful stuff as well. So let's keep on going. We're almost done here. I know it's going to be a long video, but it's well worth its weight in gold in the knowledge that you're gaining from all this stuff. So the final one here is using an in-out parameter. So this is a parameter that both functions as an in parameter as well as an out parameter all at the same time. Now, I couldn't think of a good example that really related exactly to our course material, exactly related to the transactions table that we're using. So I just kind of copped out and used a very simple example. So this procedure just squares a value that you pass in. Okay, that's all it does. So it's a very simple math type equation procedure here. So if we, it's called get squared value. Excuse me, we define the value that we're passing in as an in-out parameter. So you see it's all concatenated as one word, in-out. And then the value that we're passing in is an int. So I'm not allowing anything other than just whole numbers. So we say begin and end. And what we're doing here is I'm taking the value that's being passed in, multiplying it by itself, so that is indeed squaring it, and then passing it back into, storing it back into itself as well. Okay, so that's all we are doing. We're selecting that value into itself. If you remember, let me go back one slide. I'm going back. If you remember, we use the into keyword to store some sort of data into an out parameter. Okay, we had the out parameter TXN ID, which we were just looking at. We use select transaction ID into TXN ID from transactions. So we're just doing the same thing here, only we're not selecting from a table. We're just saying select value times value into value. So it looks like it's very confusing because we're using the same word over and over again, and the word value is all over the place. But that just shows you the flexibility of using an in-out parameter, right? The parameter's name is value. We're taking the value that it has within the value variable, multiplying it by itself, and then storing it back into itself. Okay, for use as an out parameter as well. So it's really, really cool. There's a whole lot going on here. So let's go ahead and create that as well. So let's call this get, what did I say? Get squared. I guess I could just copy it. Get squared value. No, you know what? I want to type it in. I'm feeling adventurous. Get squared value. So create procedure, get squared value. And let me say in out, because it's an in out parameter. Call it value. It's an int type. Begin and end. Remember to put double dollar sign for our delimiter here. And then I'm say select value times value. Come on now, times value. So that will just, I mean, if I just wrote this, that would work sort of. That would say, value times value, but that won't actually store it into the out parameter like we would want it to. Instead, you want to say into value as well to store it into that value out variable. So here it's being used as an in variable. Here it's being used as an out variable. Okay, very, very cool stuff. So now let's call get squared value. And I'm going to, let's say, put in the number 8. And then I'm going to say select at value as well, like so. I believe I can do it that way. Oh, sorry, no, I'm lying. I need to set value equal to 8 and then pass in the value variable. There we go. That's how we do it. So this is sort of another lesson as well. Whenever you're dealing with variables, okay, this is a variable at this point. Whenever you see the at symbol, you're using a variable. I'm setting my variable equal to something. So I'm initializing it to being holding the value of 8, and then I'm passing in that variable as an in variable, and then it's also being used as the out variable as well. So this will pass in the variable value, which currently holds the value of 8, in to the squared value or get squared value procedure. It will then multiply value times value, which will be 8 times 8, and then store it back into value as an out variable, which we will then select from as an out variable here. Okay, so there's a lot going on, but it's quite powerful stuff. So let me hit F5 to run that. So it's executed successfully, no errors. Let me clear the console. So now our procedure has been run and created. So now I'm actually going to execute my procedure like so. And sure enough, we see the result is 64. All right, now obviously we can change that to be 10 and run it again. And now it's 100. And you can change it to, I don't know, let's see how crazy we can get, 1589. There you go. So that's the square of 1589. So stored as both an input and an output parameter. That's how you use it. Very, very cool stuff. Very powerful stuff. I'm sure you're tired of hearing me say that. Fantastic. So we've hit the end of part 3 of our 4-part series, and in the next episode, I guess you can call it, we'll be looking at stored functions. Okay, so for the whole part of this, we've been looking at stored procedures. Now it's time to flip over to stored functions. We'll look at some syntax and how to get it done, and obviously some real-world examples. So can't wait to see you in the next lesson, and bye for now.